The Smoke Creek Desert at 2 in the morning is a place that does not believe in you. The playa stretches flat and pale under starlight, alkali crust the color of old bone, cracked into polygons that look like the skin of something enormous and long dead. The elevation sits near 3,852 feet. The air in late spring drops below freezing after midnight, and the silence is so total that a man's bootfall on dried mud carries a quarter-mile in every direction. There is no tree, no creek, no structure to interrupt the sound, only flatness and stars, and the kind of emptiness that makes a person wonder whether the earth remembers they are standing on it. Phelan Doss was walking that playa at 2 in the morning because he was looking for survey stakes. He had purchased a 160-acre homestead claim 6 weeks earlier at the land office in Winnemucca, and he had ridden north to find the boundary markers and decide where to begin. He carried a lantern, a compass, and a coil of rope. He did not carry a map of wells. The ground gave way without warning. One step was solid, the next was air. He dropped 10 feet straight down, hit packed earth on his back, and lay there staring up at a circle of stars framed by the rim of a hole he had not known existed. His shoulder screamed, his lungs would not fill. Above him a face appeared, round, flushed, sweating, hair pulled up and tied with cord, a kerosene lamp swinging from one thick fist. "Who are you?" the face said. "And you are lying in my well." Kenna Fosse pulled him out with a rope lashed to a forge stake driven 3 feet into the desert floor. She hauled him hand over hand, bracing her boots against the rim, and when he rolled onto flat ground gasping, she did not ask if he was hurt. She looked into the hole to make sure he had not damaged the walls. She brought him into the line shack beside her forge. Inside, Phelan saw hammers, tongs, a pry bar, shovels, a water cask nearly empty, and a hand-drawn map pinned to the wall with 4 red X marks, 4 dry wells. He asked the obvious question, "You dig alone?" Kenna wrung out the cloth she had used to clean the scrape on his back. "Nobody hires a woman to dig a well, so I dig my own." Phelan sat on the cot with his shirt off and his shoulder throbbing. He looked at the map with its 4 failures. He looked at the woman who had just hauled a man his size out of a 10-foot hole at 2 in the morning. And he cried, not from pain, from the sentence, because it landed on something inside him that had been waiting to break. Kenna stared at him. "What is wrong with you?" "Nothing is wrong. That just hurt to hear." She frowned, but she did not laugh. She said, "Sleep. I have to forage in the morning. Before we go deeper into this 5th well, let me ask you, is Kenna digging out of hope or out of despair? If you think she will find water, comment 5th well. If you think this hole is about to pull down something bigger than thirst, comment too deep. Kenna Fosse was 26 years old and smelled permanently of coal smoke, hot iron, and dry earth. She was the only blacksmith between Gerlach and the southern edge of the Black Rock Desert, operating out of a forge shed her father had built in 1878 from railroad ties and scrap tin. Her father, Milo Fosse, had been a farrier who shod horses for the freight wagons running between Winnemucca and Susanville along the Old Nobles Trail. He died when Kenna was 14, a kick from a draft horse that crushed 3 ribs and punctured a lung. He lived 4 days. On the 2nd day, he asked Kenna to finish the set of shoes he had been working on. She finished them. She had not stopped forging since. Her face was round, sun-marked across the cheeks and the bridge of her nose. Her body was heavy, wide hips, thick waist, broad chest, arms layered with fat over muscle that had been built across 12 years of swinging a 4-pound hammer. Her hands were scarred from scale and spark, her nails broken short, her wrists as thick as some men's forearms. She wore a dark work skirt stained with soot and chemical residue, a leather apron with pockets for tongs and files, and sleeves rolled above the elbow regardless of the weather. She was not the kind of woman anyone in the territory looked at and thought needed protecting. People looked at Kenna and saw an oddity, too large, too strong, too quiet, too alone. The ranchers' wives did not invite her to sewing circles. The cowboys who brought horses to be shod spoke to her the way they spoke to other tradesmen, briefly, transactionally, and when they left, some of them made remarks about her size that they thought the wind carried away before she heard. She heard. She had been cheated once in a way that taught her never to trust a promise. A supply trader named Grafton, who controlled the only reliable well within 15 miles, had offered her a deal. He would dig a well on her homestead if she shod 200 head of cattle for free. She forged every shoe. Grafton never dug. When she confronted him, he said he had never put the agreement in writing, and without paper, her word, a fat woman's word, meant nothing. After that, Kenna dug her own wells. She dug at night because the desert cooled after midnight, but also because she did not want witnesses. 4 times she had struck dry ground. 4 times she had sat at the bottom of a hole she had carved with her own hands and wept where no one could see. 4 times she had climbed out, filled the hole, and started again somewhere new. She did not ask for sympathy. She did not narrate her suffering. She forged by day and dug by night, and gave Phelan the last of her water without mentioning it was the last. That was who Kenna Fosse was, a woman who had been forced to build everything with her own hands and had done it so long she no longer knew how to accept help, even when it stood bleeding in her doorway. Phelan Doss was 6 feet 3 inches tall, broad through the shoulders, long in the back, and built the way men are built when they have spent a decade riding, fencing, roping, and hauling in open country. His hat was dusty. His coat was threadbare at the elbows. His boots were crusted with playa alkali, and his hands were large, calloused, and moved with a carefulness that seemed wrong for their size, as though he had learned that big hands break things and had spent years teaching his not to. His face was tired, not old. He was 31, but worn in the way that faces wear when they have crossed too many landscapes without stopping. His eyes were brown, quick to redden from wind and dust and sleeplessness, and quick to fill with water for reasons that had nothing to do with wind. Phelan cried easily. This was the central fact of his life and the source of most of his trouble. His father, a cattle boss in the Humboldt Valley, had called him weak at age 9 because he wept when a calf died during a difficult birth. The crew at a ranch outside Winnemucca had mocked him for stopping mid-drive to watch a rainbow form over the Bloody Run hills. A foreman in Lovelock had told him that a man who cannot control his face cannot control cattle, and let him go. Phelan had moved from ranch to ranch across northern Nevada for 11 years, never fired for poor work. He was skilled, steady, and strong, but always eventually marked as strange, soft, not quite right. He came to Smoke Creek because he wanted land of his own, a place where no one would see him cry at a sunset or a crippled horse or the sound of a child singing across a valley, a place where his tenderness would not be held against him. He had not expected to fall into a well. He had not expected the woman who pulled him out to say a sentence that broke him open. And he had not expected to sit in a line shack at 3 a.m, crying in front of a stranger, and have that stranger neither laugh nor tell him to stop. The next morning, he did not leave. He said, "I need a well. You need someone to dig. Let me help." Kenna refused. She did not trust men who made offers. Phelan did not argue. He walked to the 5th hole, picked up the shovel Kenna had left beside it, and began to dig. When Kenna heard the sound of the blade cutting earth, she came outside and looked down at him. He looked up, sweat already forming on his forehead despite the morning chill. "I am not promising anything," he said. "I am just digging." Kenna said nothing. She went back inside the forge. But that evening, she cooked 2 portions instead of 1. That was her way of granting permission without having to say the word. They fell into a rhythm the way 2 people fall into a rhythm when they share labor instead of language, slowly, without discussion, through the accumulation of small adjustments that eventually become habit. During the day, Kenna forged. Phelan watched at first, then began handling the tasks she did not ask him to do, filling the water trough, stacking the charcoal, sorting the scrap iron by weight. He did not interfere with her work. He recognized the precision of her hammer strokes, the way each blow landed in the exact center of the iron, the way she controlled the angle of the tongs with her wrist rather than her arm, the way she read the color of the metal to judge its temperature without a thermometer. She was not performing. She was simply excellent, and Phelan had enough respect for craft to stay out of its way. She forged horseshoes for a ranch north of the Granite Range. She repaired door hinges for the small church in Gerlach. She cast wagon pins for a migrant family heading west toward Susanville. People came to her forge because she was the only smith for 30 miles, and they paid because her work was flawless. Whether they respected her was a different question, and the answer was usually visible in the way they looked past her body to the anvil, as though the iron were the real blacksmith and Kenna merely the arm that swung the hammer. At night, they dug. They took turns, one in the hole, one at the rim holding the rope and passing down tools. The kerosene lamp hung from a stake above the opening, throwing a circle of yellow light into the shaft, while the desert spread dark and silent around them. The spring nights on the Smoke Creek were cold, temperatures dropping near 30 degrees by 3 a.m, and their breath fogged in the lamplight as they worked. On the second night, Phelan talked, not idle talk. He told Kenna about his father calling him weak, about the calf that died in his hands while the crew watched, about the rainbow at Winnemucca and the laughter that followed. He spoke without self-pity, the way a man recounts facts he has long since stopped trying to change. Kenna listened. She was not a talker, but she was a precise listener. She absorbed information the way she absorbed heat from the forge, standing close, letting it come to her. On the third night, she spoke. "I dig at night because I do not want anyone to see me fail again. 4 dry holes. Every time I hit dry rock, I sat at the bottom and cried. Then I climbed out and filled it in and started somewhere else." She paused. "Nobody has ever been in the hole with me." Phelan stopped digging. He looked up at her silhouette against the stars. "Then if this one is dry," he said, "and you cry, I will cry with you." Kenna laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in this story. Not a full laugh, not a happy one, but the startled sound of someone encountering an emotion they did not expect. No one had ever offered to sit in her sadness with her. Men had told her to be strong, to keep going, to stop wasting time. No one had said, "If you break, I will break beside you." After 3 nights, they had not named what was between them, but the evidence was accumulating in small domestic facts. The second plate at dinner, the lamp hung before he arrived, the shovel leaning against the rim waiting for him, the silence between them that had shifted from uncomfortable to necessary. The forge burned red by day, the well glowed white by moonlight. Both were places where people were tested by endurance, and both had begun to feel like the same place. On the 4th day, Grafton came. He arrived at the forge with 2 men, Loomis, tall and silent, and Breck, short and watchful. Grafton was 55 years old, lean, clean-shaven, with the bearing of a man who had controlled something essential for so long that he had confused commerce with authority. He owned the only stone-lined well within 15 miles of the Smoke Creek playa and sold water at 2 cents a gallon, 5 cents during dry season. Every ranch, every migrant family, every freight wagon that passed through paid Grafton for water the way they paid the weather for rain, because there was no alternative. A new well on Kenna's homestead was not a personal matter. It was a threat to the only economy Grafton controlled. He looked at the 5th hole. He looked at Phelan. Then he turned to Kenna. "You have dug 4 dry ones, Miss Fosse. This will be the 5th. I am offering you 1 cent per gallon, half my usual price, if you stop digging now." "This land is my registered homestead," Kenna said. "Filed in Winnemucca." Grafton smiled. "Paper burns, Miss Fosse." Phelan stepped forward. He was taller than Grafton by a full head, but he did not raise a fist. He did something none of them expected. He knelt beside the well, pressed his palm flat against the earth, and cried. Not for show. He cried because fury and sorrow hit him simultaneously. Fury that a woman had dug 4 wells alone in the dark, and the man standing here had cheated her out of 200 horseshoes, and sorrow that the world arranged itself so predictably against people who had no leverage except their own hands. Grafton stared. Loomis and Breck exchanged a glance. None of them had seen a cowboy weep during a confrontation. Phelan stood. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. His voice was steady. "Mr. Grafton, I will write a letter to the General Land Office in Carson City. I will include a copy of Miss Fosse's homestead filing and a sworn account of your threat to burn federal documents. You know the penalty for that." Grafton said nothing. "Miss Fosse, do you have paper and ink?" Kenna opened the storage chest and produced writing materials. Phelan sat on the forge bench, his hand shaking, his penmanship rough but legible, and wrote the letter. He signed it, folded it, sealed it. Grafton looked at the envelope. Then he turned toward his horse. Before mounting, he said over his shoulder, "You will not find water." Kenna said, "Maybe not, but I will not stop digging." The 7th night, 3 in the morning. Phelan was at the bottom of the shaft, nearly 16 feet deep now, when the shovel blade sank into something different. Not rock, not dry hardpan. The earth was dark, damp, then soft, then mud. His boots were wet. "Kenna," his voice echoed up the shaft. "Come down." She descended the ladder. She saw his boots, the dark stain climbing the leather. She looked at the floor of the well. Water was seeping up through the earth, slow, steady, undeniable. Kenna knelt. She pressed both palms into the wet ground. And she broke open, not quietly, She cried the way a person cries when 4 failures, 100 solitary nights, a betrayed promise, and every whispered insult about her body and her ambition all rupture at once. She cried from the center of herself, loud and raw, in a hole she had dug in the dark because she had no one to dig with and no one to witness either her labor or her grief. Phelan knelt beside her in the mud. Water rose around their ankles. He did not tell her to stop. He did not tell her she was strong. He cried with her the way he had promised he would. "I said if it was dry, I would cry with you," he whispered. "Turns out there is water, and I am still crying with you." Kenna laughed through her tears. She reached for his hand, her hand rough, hot, mud-covered. His was the same. They knelt together at the bottom of a 16-foot well, water rising around their boots, looking up at a circle of stars through the opening above them, and held on. The news traveled faster than the desert wind. Within a week, 3 migrant families stopped for water. Kenna did not sell it the way Grafton sold his. She traded a sack of flour, a coil of rope, a piece of tanned leather, or 1 hour of labor, setting posts, hauling stone, mending fence. The forge grew busier. People came for water and stayed to commission repairs. Kenna's life was changing. But the change brought a question she had not anticipated. While the well was empty, Phelan had a reason to stay. Now the well was full. The digging was finished. Did he still have a reason? Kenna watched him from the forge doorway each morning as he worked on his own claim, setting posts, clearing ground, and she could not bring herself to ask whether he was building a life beside hers or simply finishing a project before moving on. She had trusted Grafton once. She had learned what trust cost when it was misplaced. She could not afford to learn it again. Before the water came, their nights had a shape. The sound of the shovel, the creak of the rope, the lamp swinging above, one person in the hole and one on the rim. After the water came, the shape dissolved. There was no reason to dig, no reason for Phelan to be awake at 3 a.m, no reason for 2 plates at dinner. Kenna went back to the forge. She had more customers now, and the work kept her hands busy, but the busyness did not replace what had been lost. She missed the specific silence between her and Phelan, not the absence of sound, but the quality of it, the silence of 2 people working toward the same thing in the same dark. Phelan drove his claim stakes into the ground beside Kenna's property. He built a fence, framed a small corral, laid out the footprint of a house. From the outside, these were the actions of a man who intended to stay. But Kenna had been watching men from the outside her entire life, and she knew that actions could be temporary. Grafton had acted helpful, too, right up until the moment he stopped. Then Grafton returned, alone this time. No Loomis, no Breck. He rode in on an old mule, no weapon visible, and stood in front of the well for a long time, looking down at the water glinting in the shaft. "How much per gallon?" he asked. "Free," Kenna said, "but you trade what you have. If you have nothing, you leave 1 hour of labor." "Nobody gives water away forever." "I am not giving it away. I am trading it for what people can spare." Grafton was quiet. Then he said, in a voice lower than Kenna had ever heard from him, "My well is going dry." She looked at Phelan. He was leaning against the forge post, arms folded, eyes wet, because the old man standing alone with his mule looked lonelier than the desert. "Bring your bucket," Kenna said. "Take what you need, but you carry it yourself. I do not deliver." Grafton filled his bucket. He strapped it to the mule. Before he rode out of sight behind the playa ridge, he stopped and spoke without turning around. "You forage better than your father, Fosse." Kenna stood still. Her father had been dead for 12 years. No one in the territory had ever compared her work to his. Not because it was worse, but because no one had bothered to look closely enough to judge. Phelan stepped beside her. He did not speak. He placed his hand on her shoulder, light, as though she were something that might shatter. But Kenna Fosse did not shatter. She drew a long breath, turned back to the forge, and the sound of the hammer rang out across the playa again. A month later, the well was still giving water. Phelan had filed his homestead at the land office and built fence along the boundary of his claim. He had framed a corral and begun laying the foundation for a 2-room house. But he left the path to the well open. No gate, no fence post blocking the way. Anyone could walk from his land to Kenna's well without obstruction. He was building his life beside hers without enclosing her. One evening, when the forge coals had burned down to a low red glow and the air smelled of cooling iron and charcoal, Phelan walked into the shed. In his hand he held a small object, a ring forged from a scrap of iron he had taken from Kenna's waste pile. It was rough, uneven. The hammer marks were visible, and the band did not sit perfectly round. "I do not know how to forge well," he said. His voice shook, "but I know how to dig a well, and I know how to cry with you. If you will accept those 2 things, I want to stay." Kenna looked at the ring. She picked it up, turned it in her fingers, set it down on the anvil. Phelan's face went pale. He thought she was refusing. But Kenna walked to the forge. She blew the coals until they flared orange. She clamped a thin rod of iron into the tongs, thrust it into the heat, and began to hammer. 3 strokes, 5, 7, each one precise and decisive. The way everything she did was precise and decisive. She quenched the iron. The hiss of hot metal meeting water filled the shed, then bent it by hand, set it on the anvil, and tapped it twice with the finishing hammer. A ring, round even, smooth, sized exactly to his finger. She took his ugly ring and slid it onto her own hand. It fit because he had measured her finger while she slept, pressing a strip of leather against her knuckle in the dark. Then she took the ring she had forged and placed it on his. "Your ring is ugly," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "But your well is deep. I accept." Phelan laughed. Then he cried. Then he kissed her, the first time, in the forge shed, surrounded by the smell of hot iron and coal dust, the sound of metal cooling in the water trough. Kenna kissed him back. Then she pulled away, looked at him, and said the sentence he would carry for the rest of his life. "You cry too much." "So that is good. I will never run out of water." Phelan laughed so loud that the Smoke Creek Desert, for the first time, did not swallow the sound. It let the laughter travel across the playa, over the alkali flats, past the ridgeline, as though the desert itself wanted someone, somewhere, to hear it. 6 months later, the 5th well was still giving water. Phelan had finished the house. 2 rooms, tin roof, a wooden porch facing west, so they could watch the sun go down over the Smoke Creek Mountains. Kenna kept her forge exactly 40 paces away. She had counted. She said if it were any closer, he would cry in front of the forge and ruin her concentration. If it were any farther, he would cry from missing her. Grafton still came for water every week. He never spoke much. But each time he left something behind, a box of nails, a coil of wire, and once a battered leather notebook filled with handwritten observations about underground water patterns in the region. The shaky script of an old man recording what he had learned over 30 years of desert living. Kenna never thanked him. Grafton never waited for thanks. They understood each other the way the desert teaches people to understand, through action, not language. That spring, the Smoke Creek Desert bloomed. It happened only in years when the winter rain was generous enough. Low purple flowers spreading across the playa floor like a bruise healing in reverse, opening close to the ground, lasting 3 days before the heat took them. Phelan stood in the middle of the flowers and cried. Kenna stood beside him, arms folded, shaking her head. In 3 days the flowers will die, and you will cry about that. Summer will come, and you will cry because it is hot. Autumn will come, and you will cry because the leaves are falling, except there are no leaves out here to fall. Then I will cry because there are no leaves to fall, Phelan said, eyes still wet, mouth smiling. Kenna looked at him, and she did something rare. She laughed, a real laugh, a loud laugh, a laugh from the belly she never hid, never apologized for, never explained. And the sound of it carried farther than the hammer ever had. The Smoke Creek Desert keeps very little. Wind erases footprints before dawn. Sand covers wheel tracks before dusk. Promises spoken too easily disappear before they reach the far side of the playa. But some things stay. The fifth well, the one Kenna Fosse dug in the dark, the one a crying cowboy fell into at 2 a.m, the only one that held water, is still there. Deep, still, full. Because some things, if you dig long enough, do not run dry. Out here in Smoke Creek, the desert takes almost everything if you leave it on the surface. Footprints, wagon tracks, promises spoken too easily, the wind knows how to erase them all. But some things stay because someone dug deep enough, a well, a home, a hand that does not let go. So before we leave Kenna and Phelan beside that fifth well tonight, I want to ask you this. Do you think a man like Phelan was weak because he cried, or strong because he never hit it? And do you think Kenna found water because she was lucky, or because she refused to stop after 4 dry holes? As you're listening to this, where are you right now? What were you doing when this story reached you? Tell me what you think. I read every comment under these stories.